The night Nora signed the papers that were supposed to end her life, it was raining in Toronto the way it only rains in October. Sideways mean like the city had a personal grudge. She didn't cry. That surprised her more than anything else. She had expected tears. She had rehearsed them, almost the way you rehearse bad news you know is coming, the way you brace your knees before a collision. But when Marcus slid the termination documents across the boardroom table with that small, practiced smile, Nora felt nothing except a strange clarity, like the moment after a car accident, when the world goes very quiet and very bright. 26 months. That was how long she had worked at Caldwell & Prentice Financial Advisory. 26 months of arriving first and leaving last, of catching errors in spreadsheets that partners were about to present to clients worth 8 figures, of doing the work that got other people promoted while she stayed exactly where she was. Junior analyst, 3rd floor cubicle beside the window that didn't close all the way and let in a draft every January that made her fingers go numb. Marcus was smiling because Marcus always smiled when he was being unkind. It was his defense mechanism she had figured out early on. The smile put the cruelty at a distance from himself, made it seem like the bad news was just passing through him on its way to you. Budget realignment, he said. You understand. She understood that the firm had just landed a contract with Vael Capital, the largest acquisition in the company's history. According to the press release she had proofread herself. She understood that Marcus had presented her risk analysis under his own name to the Vael board 3 weeks ago. She understood that the senior partners had shaken his hand and that his bonus would reflect, and that her cubicle would be cleared by end of business Friday. Of course, Nora said. She took the pen. She signed. She rode the elevator down alone, holding the box that contained 26 months of her life, a spare cardigan, 2 protein bars, a succulent she'd named Gerald as a joke that nobody in the office had ever found funny, except her. The elevator music was something jazzy and inoffensive. The lobby was marble and glass. The revolving door pushed her out into the rain. She stood on Bay Street for a long moment. The rain hit her shoulders and ran down the back of her neck. A cab splashed through a puddle near the curb and soaked her left boot. She didn't have an umbrella. She had left it at her desk, which was no longer her desk. She thought, this is the lowest point. She thought, it can't get worse than this. She was wrong about that, but not in the way she expected. The letter arrived 3 days later. Nora was staying at her friend Betty's apartment in Parkdale. Air mattress, 1 pillow, the smell of Betty's cat, applying for jobs and trying not to check her bank balance too often. She had $11,000 saved. She had student loans. She had a mother in Hamilton who would worry, and a father she hadn't spoken to in 4 years, and no one else who fell into the category of emergency contact. The letter was hand-delivered, no stamp, no return address. The envelope was heavy cream stock, the kind that cost more per sheet than Nora spent on lunch. Her name was written on the front in handwriting that was precise and economical, like someone who had been taught to write by a person who did not believe in unnecessary flourishes. Ms. Nora Alcott, not Nora. Not Miss Alcott, both. The full precision of her. She stood in Betty's hallway and opened it. The letter was brief. It said that she had been referred, the word referred was underlined just once, to Meridian Group for a contract bookkeeping position. The pay was listed. Nora read the number twice. Then she sat down on the floor of the hallway, back against the wall, because her legs had briefly forgotten what they were for. It was 3 times what she had made at Caldwell & Prentice. The letter said a car would be sent at 8 o'clock the following morning if she chose to attend the introductory meeting. It said the position was 6 months in duration. It said she should bring nothing except her identification and her professional references. At the bottom, in the same precise handwriting, dress for a working meeting, not an interview. She almost didn't go. She spent the rest of the evening holding the letter and eating crackers, because Betty didn't have anything else in the apartment except cat food and oat milk. She spent an hour on the internet trying to find any trace of Meridian Group and found almost nothing. A shell company, it looked like, registered in Ontario, address listed as a law firm downtown. The kind of entity that existed precisely because it didn't want to be found. She thought about all the reasons not to go. She catalogued them the way she catalogued everything. Methodically, one column yes, one column no. The yes column had one item in it, and it was the number from the letter, and it was enough. The car arrived at exactly 8 o'clock. The driver didn't speak. The car was black and clean and warmer than anywhere Nora had been in 3 days. She watched the city slide past the window. Parkdale giving way to downtown. Downtown giving way to somewhere quieter, older, the kind of neighborhood where the buildings didn't have signs, because everyone who needed to find them already knew where they were. They stopped in front of a building on a street she didn't recognize. Stone facade, 4 stories. Windows that reflected the grey October sky like mirrors. A man in a dark coat held the door without being asked. Inside, marble floors. A reception desk with no receptionist. Elevator doors that opened as she approached, like someone had been watching for her. She stepped inside. The elevator went up. It opened onto a hallway that smelled like cedar and paper, and, faintly, cigarette smoke that had been banned somewhere long ago and lingered in the walls anyway. A woman named Solange met her at the door. 50s, sharp clothes, the posture of someone who had decided long ago never to be surprised by anything again. She offered Nora a cup of coffee, showed her to a chair, and said, "Mr. Vael will be a few minutes." Nora thought, Vael. She turned the name over in her mind. She had tried to find information on Meridian Group's principals and found nothing. She had not thought to look for a surname that simple and that opaque. The office she was sitting in was very large and very quiet. There were no decorations except for a single painting on the far wall. Abstract, all greys and charcoal. The kind of thing that wasn't trying to be beautiful so much as precise. The desk was cleared. There were 2 leather chairs facing each other across a low table. Everything was the color of something that cost money without announcing it. She was halfway through the coffee when the door opened. He didn't make an entrance. That was the first thing she noticed. He walked into the room the way people walk into rooms they own. Not performing the ownership, just inhabiting it. He was tall, broad through the shoulders in the way that came from use rather than vanity, wearing a dark suit that fit him with the quiet correctness of something made specifically for his body. His hair was dark and going grey at the temples. There was a scar along his jaw, faint and old, the kind you stopped noticing after the first 30 seconds. He looked, she thought, like a man who had long since decided that most things weren't worth the energy of pretending. He sat across from her. He did not smile. He looked at her the way she imagined actuaries looked at actuarial tables. Assessing, calculating, arriving at a conclusion before the other person had finished their sentence. Miss Alcott, he said. His voice was low, unhurried. You reviewed the Varon Capital pre-acquisition risk model. It was not a question. I wrote it, Nora said. Something moved behind his eyes, not surprise, something closer to confirmation. I know, he said. He opened a folder on the table. Between them, she recognized the document immediately, her analysis, her formatting, her footnotes, Marcus's name on the cover page. Her stomach did something complicated. How did you? I made it my business to know, Vael said. Varon Capital is one of 3 companies I have significant interest in. When I read the risk model, I requested the original version, not the one submitted. He paused. The one before it was edited. Nora set down her coffee cup very carefully. The edits removed your projections about the northern corridor exposure, he said. The ones suggesting the acquisition timeline was 6 months too aggressive. They were right, she said. The projections. Yes, he said. They were. He said it simply, without emphasis, the way you state something that has already been settled. She realized, looking at him, that she had walked into a room with a man who had already made a decision and was now doing her the courtesy of explaining it to her, which was more courtesy than most people in positions like his would bother with. The position I'm offering, he said, is legitimate. You will work in this building. You will manage accounts that I will specify. The work is what it appears to be, bookkeeping, analysis, reconciliation. The pay is what the letter stated, and the 6 months, she said. 6 months, he confirmed. At which point I will evaluate whether the arrangement should continue. Nora looked at him. He looked back. The rain had followed her from Parkdale, and she could hear it now against the tall windows, the same sideways October rain, like the city was still carrying its grudge. "You hand-delivered the letter," she said. "I did. You had my address. I did. That should probably concern me more than it does," she said. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Probably," he agreed. She thought about her $11,000. She thought about the cubicle with the broken window and the draft in January, and Gerald the succulent, who was currently sitting on Betty's windowsill, and who deserved better than a windowsill. She thought about Marcus's small, practiced smile. "What are the accounts?" she said. He told her. They were complex and varied, and some of them had structures she had only read about in textbooks, and one of them was, she suspected, designed to be deliberately confusing to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. She paid close attention. She asked 2 questions. He answered both of them in full, without hedging. When she looked up, he was watching her with that same assessing expression. "I want everything in writing," she said. "Scope of work, deliverables, payment schedule, termination conditions. Already prepared," he said. "I want my own copy. Of course, and I want it reviewed by a lawyer of my choosing before I sign." This time the sound he made was definitely something in the register of a laugh, even if it didn't reach his face. "Solange will give you the name of 3 independent counsel who have no relationship to my interests," he said. "Choose whichever one you like." Nora looked at the contract. Solange appeared at the door to deliver, and she thought that this was either the best decision she had ever made or the worst one, and that there was genuinely no way to know which from where she was standing. She took the contract. She said she would have an answer by Thursday. She left. In the elevator, alone, going down, she realized her hands were steady. She had expected them to shake. She'd been waiting for the fear to arrive, the full weight of what she had just walked into. A man with no public profile and a building with no sign and accounts structured like puzzles, but her hands were steady. She thought that was probably information about herself. She started on a Monday. The office was quieter than she expected. She had braced herself for something cinematic. Suited men with earpieces, a general atmosphere of barely suppressed violence. What she found instead was a floor of serious people working seriously, the particular hush of people who have been told that mistakes are expensive and have taken that to heart. Her workspace was on the 2nd floor. It had a real window that closed properly. The chair was better than any chair she had ever sat in at Caldwell & Prentice. On the desk, when she arrived, there was a new laptop, a set of access credentials, and a small printed note in that same precise handwriting. "Coffee is on the 3rd floor. Kitchen is yours to use. No welcome, no flourish. Just, here are the things you need. Here is the thing that will make the work tolerable." She started on the accounts. They were interesting. That was the thing nobody tells you about working for someone like Vael. The work itself was genuinely, compulsively interesting. The accounts were layered and interconnected in ways that reminded her of a good logic puzzle, the kind where pulling one thread changed everything else, where you couldn't understand the whole until you'd mapped every part. She spent the first week just building a picture of it, not doing anything, not changing anything, just seeing. On Friday afternoon, Vael came to her floor. He stood in the doorway of the workspace for a moment before she noticed him. She noticed because the temperature of the room seemed to shift, not dramatically, not the way it shifts in films, but a small recalibration, the way a room changes when someone with significant presence enters it. "First week," he said. "First week," she agreed. "Questions?" She had 17. She had ranked them in order of priority. She asked the top 3. He answered all of them, and then answered one she hadn't asked yet because he had noticed the shape of where she was heading. She sat back in her chair and looked at him. "The Linden Holdings structure," she said. "It's not just complex for complexity's sake. Someone built it that way on purpose, to obscure something specific." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Is that something I'm supposed to find or supposed to leave alone?" "Find it," he said. "That's why you're here." She found it by the following Thursday. She wrote it up in a memo she kept to 4 pages because she believed in brevity, and because anything that couldn't be explained in 4 pages probably wasn't understood well enough yet to explain at all. She sent it to Solange, who sent it to Vael, and heard nothing for 2 days. On Saturday morning, she was at her desk early. She came in on weekends, not because she was told to, but because the office was quiet and she worked better in quiet. When Vael appeared in the doorway again. "You found it," he said. Was there a doubt? He looked at her with that expression she was learning to read, the one that was almost something warmer, the one that didn't quite make it past the wall he kept around himself like a perimeter. "No," he said, "there wasn't." He came into the room and sat in the chair across from her desk, which was the first time she'd seen him sit somewhere that wasn't his own office. He asked her to walk him through the memo. She did. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked one question, not about her findings, but about her methodology, how she had known to look in that particular direction. She told him. He listened to that, too. When she was done, he said, "You would have found this in 6 weeks. You did it in 10 days. The trail wasn't that well hidden," she said. "Someone got sloppy in the 3rd layer. Most people don't look at the 3rd layer. Most people don't know there is one," she said. "That's not the same thing." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the window behind her. The October rain had moved on and been replaced by the early grey of November, the light that feels like the city is slowly running out of itself until January, when it bottoms out and begins the long, slow climb back. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" He seemed to consider whether to answer honestly. "Someone more cautious," he said at last, "given the circumstances." "I'm plenty cautious," she said. "I just don't perform it." That sound again, the almost law, the thing that lived just below his waterline. "No," he said. "You don't." November became a rhythm. She learned the shape of him the way you learn the shape of a building you work in, the load-bearing walls, the places where the structure had been modified over time, the small signs of what it was before it was what it is now. He was in the office before she arrived, and often still there when she left. He read more than she expected. Physical books, not a screen. He drank his coffee without milk and rarely finished a cup. He remembered every number she had ever given him, and could recall them weeks later in conversation, which she found unnerving until she realized he found her ability to do the same thing equally unnerving, and after that it felt more like common ground. He didn't talk about himself. She didn't ask. There were rules to this arrangement, written and unwritten, and one of the unwritten ones was that you didn't reach past the boundaries that had been set. But the boundaries had a way of shifting, slightly, incrementally, the way geological things shift. So slowly you don't notice until you're standing somewhere entirely different from where you started. It was the last week of November when she first understood the full scope of what Meridian Group actually was. She had known, in a general way, from the letter and the building and the accounts and Vael himself, that she was working for something that operated in the grey space between legal and illegal, probably closer to the latter in some of its original architecture, probably more complicated than either label could contain. She was not naive. She was from Hamilton. She had grown up understanding that the world had a visible surface and a weight-bearing understructure, and that the people who understood only the surface were at a permanent disadvantage. But understanding it abstractly and understanding it specifically were different things. The specific understanding arrived in the form of a man named Rennick. He came to the building on a Tuesday afternoon. She had watched him come in from the window, 2 men with him, the particular way they arranged themselves around him, saying everything about what they were there for. She heard raised voices from the floor above, brief and quickly contained. She kept working. Vael came to her office an hour later. He looked the same as he always did, but the set of his shoulders was different. Someone who didn't pay attention would have missed it. She paid attention. "You heard that," he said. "Not a question." "Some of it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down, across from her, in the chair that had become his chair in this particular room over the past 6 weeks. "Rennick has been pulling liquidity from a shared account," he said. "An account that belongs to several parties, not just him. He has been doing this for 8 months. He believed nobody was tracking it carefully enough to notice. Nora thought about the accounts she had been working on. She thought about the third layer of the Linden Holdings structure. She thought about the particular shape of the numbers she had been looking at for 6 weeks, and then she thought about what those numbers would look like if you added 8 months of quiet extraction, and her stomach went cold. "How much?" she said. He told her. She set her pen down. "He was right," she said slowly. "Nobody would have tracked it. The way the accounts are structured, the extraction would read as standard operating variance, unless you knew specifically what you were looking at." "Yes," Vael said. "Unless someone had mapped the entire system first. Yes." She looked at him. "That's why you hired me," she said. He held her gaze. "That's part of why I hired you." She turned this over. "What happens to Rennick? That's being managed. That's not an answer." "It's the answer I'm giving you," he said. And then, more quietly, "It's not your concern. The accounts are your concern. The extraction has been stopped. What I need from you is a full reconstruction of the correct figures going back 9 months." She should have nodded. She should have said understood and gone back to her spreadsheet. That was the professional thing to do. That was the thing that respected the walls between her work and whatever existed on the other side of those walls. Instead, she said, "Has anyone ever told you that you manage people the way you manage accounts?" He looked at her. "Categorized," she said. "Compartmentalized. This column, this column, this column. Nothing touches anything else. That's efficient," he said. "It's also lonely," she said, sat between them. She hadn't planned to say it. She felt the shape of it in the air, too honest for the room, too close to the unwritten rules. Vael was very still. "Yes," he said at last. "It is." Neither of them said anything else for a moment. The November light was doing its grey thing to the window. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang and was answered. "I'll have the reconstruction done by Friday," she said. He stood. "I know you will." He was at the door when she said his name, his surname, the way she always called him. He stopped. "The first month," she said, "when you looked into me, found my address, got the original version of the risk model." She paused. "Were you testing me, or were you actually looking for someone to do this work?" He turned. He looked at her from the doorway with that expression she still hadn't fully catalogued. "Both," he said, "but not equally. Which one more?" "I needed someone who could read what other people couldn't see," he said. "That's harder to find than the work itself." She nodded. He left. She sat in the quiet office with the window that actually closed, and the chair that was better than any chair she'd ever worked in, and she thought that she had come into this arrangement knowing exactly what it was, knowing the terms, knowing the duration, knowing that in 6 months she would walk back out into the city and find the next thing. She thought that she had not accounted for the possibility that the thing she was in might become something she did not want to walk away from. That was sloppy, she told herself. That was the kind of thing that happened when you stopped watching the third layer. December arrived, and the city went quiet under the first snow, and she found 2 more inconsistencies, both smaller than the Rennick extraction, both handled the same way, reported to Vael, acted upon, folded back into the structure with the clean efficiency of someone for whom problems were things to be resolved rather than lamented. She had stopped finding this unsettling. She wasn't sure what that said about her. She worked. She drank the coffee from the 3rd floor. She ate lunch at her desk, usually, except on Thursdays when Solange left a container of food on the corner of her desk at noon without explanation, which had started in the 3rd week and which Nora had stopped questioning. Vael worked near her often now. Not in her office. He didn't intrude. That wasn't his nature. But on her floor, in the adjacent room, visible through the glass partition if she looked up. She had started working out the patterns of his attention. The documents he read twice, the calls he took standing up versus sitting down, the small vertical line between his brows that appeared when something was not going the way the numbers said it should. He had started asking her opinion on things that were not, strictly speaking, within her scope of work. She had started giving them. The line between the accounts are your concern, and what do you think had moved? the same way all the lines moved between them, slowly, undeniably, with the particular logic of two people who were both paying too much attention to pretend otherwise. It was December 14th when it happened. She had been working late. The building was quiet the way it got quiet after 8 o'clock, when the day shift people left, and only the ones without anywhere better to be remained. She was reconciling a set of figures that had been bothering her for a week, the specific dissatisfaction of a number that almost works but doesn't quite, and she had been at it long enough that she had stopped noticing the time. She became aware that Vael was in the doorway. She didn't look up yet. "There's food," he said. "I know, Solange." "Not Solange," he said. "Me, downstairs, if you want." She looked up then. He was standing in the doorway with the expression she'd finally catalogued, the one that had almost reached something, the one that was asking something without the architecture to ask it out loud, the one that she had been watching arrive in increments since the Saturday morning in November, when he had sat in the chair across from her desk and asked about her methodology. She saved the file. She closed the laptop. She stood. "Okay," she said. They ate in the small kitchen on the 3rd floor. He had ordered from somewhere that wasn't a place that did takeout, which meant he had called someone who had called someone, which she chose not to think too hard about. The food was good. The kitchen table was slightly too small for 2 adults to eat at, without being closer than professional distance. They were closer than professional distance. He told her, in pieces, not all at once, not as a confession, but as information being transferred between two people who had already understood most of it from context. What Meridian was, where it had come from, what it was in the process of becoming. The history of a structure built in one era that was trying to function in a different one. The particular problem of having inherited something that required a different kind of management than it had been built for. She listened. She asked questions. He answered them in full. At some point she said, "You could have told me this in the interview. You would have left," he said. "Maybe," she said. "But you didn't know that." "No," he said. "But I know it now." She looked at him across the too small table in the 3rd floor kitchen, with the snow coming down outside the window and the building quiet around them, and she thought that she had arrived here 3 months ago with $11,000 and a succulent named Gerald, and a box of things from a cubicle she would never go back to. She had arrived expecting 6 months and a number on a page and a clean exit. She thought, "I did not account for this." She thought, "I'm not sure I want to." "The contract ends in 3 months, she said. "It can be extended," he said. "By you." "By us," he said. "It was always going to be by us." She sat with that for a moment. The snow was the good December snow, not the wet, heavy kind that turns to grey slush by morning, but the dry, quiet kind that settles and stays, the kind that makes the city look like it has finally decided to be patient with itself. She thought the worst night of my life was in October, standing on Bay Street with rain down the back of my neck and a box with a succulent in it and nothing else. She thought, it became something else. She thought, that's information too. 3 months is a long time to decide, she said. 3 months is nothing, he said. I've been watching accounts for 30 years. 3 months is the beginning of a picture. And what does the picture look like? He looked at her directly, the way he always looked at her, assessingly, but not coldly, the way you look at something you have decided is worth the full cost of your attention. Like something I want to understand better, he said, if you're willing. She didn't say yes immediately. That wasn't how she made decisions. She sat with it, turned it, looked at it from the angle she hadn't looked at yet, checked the third layer. The third layer said, you are already here. You have been here for some time. The only question is whether you're willing to name it. She was. Ask Solange to amend the contract, she said, and tell her to stop leaving my lunch on my desk anonymously. I know it was from you. It's been from you since the 3rd week. He was quiet for a moment. How did you know? The containers, she said. Always from the same place. Same fold on the lid. Solange would have varied it. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression that had finally fully arrived, the one past the wall, the one without the perimeter. I didn't think anyone would notice, he said. That, she said, was the 3rd layer. Outside, the snow kept coming down over Toronto, patient and quiet, settling over the city like something that had been waiting a long time and had decided, finally, that it was time to stay.